Hello, hello. Thanks for joining me on the All In podcast with Nate Pale. I am your host, Nate Pale. This episode, we had a special guest named Oleg Lougheed. And I met Oleg again from the Unconventional Leaders Facebook group. This has just been a wonderful resource of meeting interesting people from all kinds of walks of life, people you wouldn't normally get a chance to run into, rub elbows with in your normal course of business activities or your normal job networking events. So it's been real exciting for me. So Oleg has a very interesting story. He's a real young kid, 26. So I guess he's not really a kid, but he came to America, adopted at a very young age, and he had been on this journey where he didn't have a father, and he struggled with his mother's alcoholism, which led him to become emancipated, and eventually made his way over to America. And he's working on some really cool projects, and he's going to talk a little bit about them. But it's really about discovering your voice, discovering who you are, and sharing that with the world, and realizing that you're not alone out there. There's a lot of people that have gone through similar experiences, and when you help tell the story of who you are, it helps you discover who you are, and also helps others discover that as well. So I'm going to let him speak for himself, but this is a really interesting show, and Oleg is just an amazing guy. So be sure to reach out to him. I'll have all of his contact information in the show notes. And again, at the end of the show, please leave a review, a comment. If you liked what you heard, you found value in it, subscribe to the show and share it with a friend or two. Anyways, off to the races. Let's go.
Want to go far in business and in life? You can't do it alone. The secret is expanding your network of personal relationships, building friendships, connecting on an intimate level, away from the office, over a coffee or cocktail. Welcome to All In with Nate Peo, the show that asks what happens when you go all in and leverage the power of your network of personal relationships.
All right. So thanks for coming on, Oleg. Great to have you. We talked not too long ago. We were chatting about kind of like your history and where you've been. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, geez, you got such a fabulous, interesting story. I got to end it right now because I'm like, this is so exciting, but it's organic the way that you were telling the story and the conversation we were having, how we were connecting. I was like, if we did do a podcast, I'd hate to like rehash everything we talked about in this sense, and like it not be that same organic discovery. So we were kind of chatting, about connecting, making relationships, and how that worked out. So maybe you could start off with just kind of giving me like your life story and what brought you to Heather Parody's Facebook group, Unconventional Leaders, and how we originally connected.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you creating this space and inviting me to be part of it. First of all, for me, the story in the shortest form possible that I could imagine, it is, I was born in a foreign country, and the country is Russia. And the town that I was born in is called Chubarkul, which is in the direction of Kazakhstan, for those that have a sense of direction as far as where the cities are located. And for my first couple of years of my life, from birth, I had a relatively normal upbringing. And that is, I was under one roof with my mom and my sister. The story behind my dad is that he was absent from birth. And at about 3 to 4, maybe 5 years old, everything had changed. And what I mean by everything is my mom chose to become an alcoholic. It put my sister in a very difficult position where she had to all of a sudden transition from being a sister to possibly the role of a mother to me. And I can only imagine the sacrifices that she had to make within her life in order to make something like that happen. But what I've learned ultimately, it is that due to her sacrifices and the decisions she made along the way, I am alive because of her and so many other people that came into my life that helped me understand it. But fast forward to when I was 9 years old, I had a moment within my life where I think most of us are able to relate to, and that is enough is enough. And once you feel that you've had enough of your environment and the different events that you've gone through, you change, you look for different ways to make a change.
But at 9 years old, that's like really young to be that aware, that self-cognizant to say, I've had enough and I want to make a change. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
I think for me, the reason why I was able to make a change like that is I consider myself to be an old soul. I'm 27 years old, but I feel and I have felt for many years that I have acquired so many different experiences that allow me to relate of people of all walks of life and all age groups. I haven't experienced one particular opportunity where I didn't feel like I could connect with an individual. And I think the reason why connections happen the way they do for me is because every single opportunity that I go into, I choose to go with an open mind and I choose to stay curious. I choose to stay curious not only about the process that I'm going to put myself through as far as growth and understanding how I interact with other people and my desire to understand people even more than I thought I knew and wanted to, but also creating that space for the other individual or individuals to engage within the same mindset. So when I talk about that time and making that decision as a 9-year-old kid, I think that even though I was within a 9-year-old body, that my mind and my spirit were significantly older. And so when we talk about different levels of self-awareness and intuition, I think for me, I was just very fortunate to have the different events that I've had within my years leading up to that particular point that helped me understand who I am and shape me as that individual that I can be and ultimately wanted to be. So fast forward to when I was 12, from 9, when I made the decision was to give up my parents' rights and go and live in a Russian orphanage. I ended up living there for 3 years. And then
did your sister go with you at that time?
She did not. The place that she did go with me was the beginning, and that was to City Hall, where we actually gave up her rights and my mom's rights, and I became the ward of the state. And then beyond that, she was able to come to the orphanage and visit me on a couple occasions. But, the biggest challenge for me as I reflect back upon my journey right now is every single time she came to visit and she had asked me how I was, how are things there, I lied. I didn't tell her the truth. I didn't tell her the fact that I was experiencing abuse, that I was seeing other kids abused every day, every week, for some of the things, as I look back at them now and try to rationalize, I don't think they deserved abused. I mean, some kids were abused strictly for the fact that they received failing grades in school. So how would punishment, in my opinion, change any of that? What if the kid just had a different interest? What if he was an artist instead of a mathematician, and yet he was forced to become one and not the other? So when my sister came to visit during those years there, I lied almost every single time about how things were. I was very protective of my environment. And I also understood that the visitation room was directly across from where the director used to live. Or not live, but that was her office. And so I never knew when she was there. So I had to be very cautious about what I said, because if I were to say something out of place, or if I actually told her the truth, that after she would leave, I would get punished.
Right.
And that's the last thing I wanted to do. So, for me, it was a very interesting journey to live during that time and experience everything that I have. But I think the more I look back at my journey and all the different experiences that I've had in my life, I firmly believe and choose to not look at every single one of them as good or bad. I rather just try and accept them as is, because it is every single one of those events, every single one of those circumstances that have helped develop me the person that I am and give me the level of understanding that I have in order to be able to step into this next chapter of my life, where I can actually inspire other people and help people understand that regardless of what your past has been, your past doesn't have to define your present. It doesn't have to define your future. There are ways that you can look at it from a different perspective. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen within the first minute, first hour. It takes time. It takes time to cultivate that mindset. But I think the most important thing that I try and communicate to people that was communicated to me initially through Les Brown. Les Brown has a speech called It's Possible. The reason why I began to believe in this mindset and fully believe in it is because
and this is when you were like 12 years old, you started believing this mindset?
No, this is way later on in life. This was probably 5 or 6 years ago. 5 or 6 years ago, that's when I really started to believe. But beyond that, when I was younger, I more so believed in myself, which I continue to do so. But I didn't have any figures to look up to. I didn't, like I told you, I didn't really have any parental figures to look up to as well for support and caring. So I was on my own. I was that lone soul that was trying to find his way through life. And I think having lived through those moments of survival really taught me a lot about myself and ultimately what I'm capable of.
Right.
Once I was able to get out of it.
Yeah, I want to add to that, but those events and that we go through and we shape, and everybody has their own journey and own experiences, but it shapes us. So when we have the good things, we have the bad things, we learn from those experiences. And when you start becoming self-aware, like, hey, this made me who I am, I think you'll probably be touched on this is when you're going through them, a lot of times you think, hey, I'm the only one experiencing this.
Yeah.
I just need to bottle it down. I don't need to, dwell on it because nobody else has to deal with it. But then you start sharing, be a little bit vulnerable of those experiences, and you find out, hey, maybe you're not the only one. And when you realize you're not the only one, then you realize there's other people out there that feel that they're the only one, and you're able to maybe reach out to those people, bring them in, and help them kind of. And I'm setting you up here a little bit for it to discover who they are.
Yeah. For me, I think what's interesting as far as what you just said is that what I've learned is actually as I age, I think there was a tendency for me to do exactly as you said. And that is to bottle certain things, not to discuss them, not to go and talk about the quote unquote insecurities, but rather I think the mindset has been you just figure it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the older you get, supposedly the more solutions you have. But what I've learned is that, so I'm only 27 years old as this podcast is happening, but even over the course of my life, there have been so many different things that are just expected of me to know. But I just started to question myself, how am I supposed to know that if I've never had the opportunity to learn, to engage, to fully process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just had a conversation earlier today with 3 or 4 different people who have faced a series of challenges of their own. And a lot of the challenges, for example, it had to do with financial stress or financial instability, losing certain homes, properties, possessions, and stuff like that. And it just made me realize that why don't we talk about those experiences? Why do we choose to put experiences like that into a quote unquote bad or a less than category where it doesn't get brought up in discussions? Why don't we talk about our family dynamics where we may not fully agree with some of the perspectives? It could be our closest people, our parents. I always acknowledge my parents and I'm completely, extremely grateful and just supportive of the decisions that they've made. And the reason why is because they continue to create that space for me. They gave me an opportunity to be curious. They gave me an opportunity to make my own mistakes and to give me a chance to redefine my own world and how I choose to view different things and who I choose to bring into that. But I think very oftentimes, as you had mentioned, we put things into a good and bad and we only focus on the good.
Mm-hmm.
But
or we bring out the bad experiences when they're past. And
yes.
And I'm speaking a little bit from experience. So when you talk about financial difficulties, like I guess maybe like 10, 11 years ago, I was in a position where I struggled financially. I had a business that made zero money, and I wasn't able to pay my bills. I wasn't able to pay my mortgage. I ended up having a house that was foreclosed on. And at the time, I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell anybody about it. My wife at the time, she was my girlfriend. I said, "Hey, I need to tell you that I'm in this predicament." And I was a little bit nervous to see how she would take it, how she'd react to it. And she was, supportive, like, "Hey, we'll get this fixed. We'll work through your problems to change the situation." And it took years to do it. But I didn't tell anybody else about it. I didn't really share that knowledge with anybody. And until it had been passed. And then it's like, okay, I've been through a rough time too. Let me tell you about how I went through a rough time and I'm through it. But that whole period when you're going through it, you just you're embarrassed to talk about it. And at the time, a lot of people were in the same boat. You just kind of hide it and pretend like, hey, it didn't really happen. But then once it's happened, you're past it. Like, okay, now I want to talk about it. But there could have been a time where I could have talked about it sooner, maybe been helped earlier in the process, or discussed what I was going through with somebody else, maybe had picked up on it, and then maybe they would learn something from it and correct their actions or get out of their situation a little sooner if they knew, hey, I'm not the only one.
Exactly. I'll tell you a story in regard to that. So a couple of years ago, I was going through one of those times, not exactly the same time as far as, losing a house or stuff like that. But I was just starting this business, and part of starting business, as I'm sure you can relate, is that there's no blueprint to any of it. No, so you don't really know the resources it's going to take, the money it's going to take. And the only way to do it is just to get into it and start learning. So I was starting this business, and at first it wasn't making any money, but I just knew that if I put all of my time and energy towards it, that eventually it's going to start manifesting into something that I envision, because that's what I believe in. So there's a story one day that I was driving through town here in Austin, Texas, and I had 5 miles left in my gas tank. When you see that, you look at the number and every time it goes down and down. And so at first it stuck at 4, and then all of a sudden it went to 3 to 2. I had $43. I had $43 in my bank account. And I thought to myself, if I drive to the bank was 0.4 miles away from where I was, and I was at the light. I said, if I drive to the bank, I'm going to have to turn around to get to this same exact corner where the gas station was. And I might run out of gas. And there's no way, there's no shoulder, there's no way to pull over, right? So I just pulled into the gas station, parked my car, and literally jogged to the bank. But here's the thing that was interesting for me to think about. As I was jogging to the bank, I didn't take the route that was closest to the road. I ended up cutting through the parking lots. And the reason why is because I didn't want to be seen in that light. I didn't want someone to look at me and say, like, why is he jogging? And then after that, if they were to ask me even more questions, say, okay, you're struggling financially. Wow. And then the judgment and the fear of rejection in being part of their group would set in. I went to the bank. I withdrew the $43 or whatever the amount was. And then I ran back. And I took the same exact way for about half of the way. And then I remember I stopped, and I had this very distinct moment in my mind. And I said, why am I trying to hide? Who am I hiding from? I'm hiding from me. Right. I'm actually choosing to wear a mask. I'm creating a story. I'm creating a narrative that if anyone were to see me, if any of my friends were to see me, that they would somehow think of me as less than. So from that point on, I not turned around, but I stepped onto the main sidewalk, and I just continued walking. And that's, I think, the most important part that I've learned throughout my own journey is having been through so many different instances, whether it was in school, middle school, and high school, and that is either being bullied or being a bully, or just different situations where I truly felt like I wasn't myself because I had to fit in. That was the only way that I thought was to be accepted within this world, was you had to fit in the box. You had to do what some of the other people did because that was the accepted behavior. But what all those moments helped me realize was that you only have one life to live. And this is not a rehearsal. You don't get another chance. So why live a life where I'm going to hide behind a mask and not be who I truly am? Thinking that I will never find the people that I'm meant to connect with.
Yeah. So you're talking connections, and you're in Austin, right? Austin, Texas. But you didn't start off in, I mean, clearly you started off in Russia, but and now you're in Austin, Texas. And we talked before, and you had an interesting, I guess, take on your lifestyle that brought you from various places to Austin. That relied on having personal relationships with people some you know, some you don't know, some you know vaguely, some you know closely. So maybe could you walk through that part of your story?
Absolutely. Well, the way that I actually ended up being in Austin and the story behind that. So when I was adopted, I ended up being adopted into Ann Arbor, Michigan, where I ended up living for 12 years, 11 and 12 years. And after graduating from college and just kind of being in that particular city and then actually coming back there and kind of revisiting certain parts, I knew something within me had to change. I wanted to experience something different. I wanted to be part of a group that was there to support me and encourage me as far as when it came to pursuing my own dreams and aspirations. And that's where I started to do a lot of research into different cities that had good entrepreneurial ecosystem, high quality of life, and an environment and a weather that is slightly different than the one that I was used to living in those states. So I remember the next thing I did was I put together this list, and at the time I was in a relationship, and her and I started to look at the different cities and how much we can afford and stuff like that. And then about a week prior to actually moving here, I came across an article that said Austin, Texas just bypassed Silicon Valley for X, Y, and Z. I went back to my spreadsheet, and the X, Y, and Z were the same exact things that the article had mentioned: quality of life, entrepreneurial ecosystem, access to resources. I remember I picked up the phone and I said, "Hey, Mom, I'm moving to Austin, Texas." And they did exactly that. Both my parents laughed. And the reason why is because just the notion that we have of Texas, especially living in Michigan, everyone wears cowboy boots, everyone rides a horse, everyone owns a gun.
I was in Austin about a year and a half ago, and I knew Austin was different in the sense, like, keep Austin weird, or is that Portland? But whatever. But I knew it was different than, say, Dallas, Texas, or San Antonio, or just, cowboy boots and belt buckles. But I was like shocked that there was like zero cowboy boots and cowboy hats and belt buckles. It was like definitely not the Texas I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, it's a city that, just like any other city, it's a melting pot of different personas and cultures and stuff like that. But for me, what ended up happening was, I'll still remember this day as if it happened yesterday. I ended up packing my car and I drove here. We drove here 28 hours. We didn't know anyone, didn't know a soul, maybe like one other person that kind of helped us get adjusted and said, okay, you may want to try this area, or here's a place where some decent apartments and stuff like that. But for me, I've always believed in myself, and I've always believed in my ability to just figure it out, right? No matter where I land, no matter what situation I'm in, I've understood that due to my past, I was able to figure out things within that time. So why can't I figure it out now? So moving here was really just the beginning of this chapter of mine of becoming who I wanted to become and starting to build this organization. But to answer your question more directly, as far as when it comes to connections, I don't really look at a network as far as having a professional group, personal group, gym buddies, people you read a book with. I view a network as just one big network. Right. So if I'm going to spend time in sharing who I am and connecting with you on a deep level, my intention is to connect with you to a degree so that no matter what the circumstances may be, I can turn to you and I can see you as an individual that I first saw when I had that initial conversation. Mm-hmm. And that's really what I try and do with every single person and every single opportunity, is to create that space and not come to you only when I have a professional problem or only when it's a personal circumstance or whatever some of the other categories are. And it's not to say that it's right or wrong. It's just that's what I choose to build. That's how I choose to live my life, So if you and I only have 2 conversations, which I highly doubt that's going to happen, just knowing who we are. But if that's all we have, I just know for a fact 100% that I've built a very solid foundation of trust, respect, honesty, authenticity with you, that I can turn to you if the time comes. And I think that's the thing that, in my opinion, was missing the most for me, was I used to categorize the different aspects of my network. And I used to look at things as far as if I'm experiencing a financial problem, right? Mm-hmm. And I felt that, okay, I can't ask this person because they're only part of the professional network. But here's the thing. If you have a problem, you have a problem.
Yeah.
So the only way you solve it is to just put yourself out there and make the ask, right? To me, it doesn't matter how many interactions I had. All it matters is, do I feel like there's enough of a connection that the person can help me get through whatever the challenge that I have in front of me?
Yeah. I think, when you talk about, like, if you bucket relationships as like, this is my gym buddy, this is my work buddy, this is my friend from high school. Yeah. You have this, maybe a preconceived notion of who they are. Like,
I know what they're capable of.
I know this little bit about them. And because you don't share all of yourself with them, they don't share all of it back. But when you're a bit more vulnerable, sometimes you find out that someone who you thought you maybe had very little in common with, you have an extremely a large amount of things in common. And had you known that prior, when you have like a challenge or you need or you need to connect with somebody else, you don't ask them because you don't know. But then you find out later, like, oh my God, like we had this, shared experience, shared similarities, and they totally could have been there for you if you had asked. You never choose to. So and it's not always easy to be vulnerable with everybody, and a lot of times feel like, I don't want to hear like your whole story and all this, that I kind of want to keep you kind of at arm's length. But I think for me, when I've shared vulnerable sides of me, people have came to me and said, hey, I feel the same way. And all of a sudden somebody that I thought was just kind of like a acquaintance, I'm like, oh, I didn't know that about you. Like, I feel automatically closer to them, and they're less of an acquaintance and more of a friend. And it's allowed the relationship to develop more into close friendships and expand from that. And those type of things are exciting when they occur, and they're very cool to see happen.
They are. And one of the things that you mentioned that's very important to note is, I think when we categorize and label certain people for who we think they are, we actually limit their potential to begin with. If I only look at you as someone who is there to help me professionally when it comes to acquiring sponsorships for any of the events that we host, well, then I don't give yourself the opportunity to also present yourself, maybe even beyond that. And who knows, what I think of when I think of you and I think of the possible strengths that you have, I could be completely off. Those might be just areas of interest that you've expressed through your network and to other people, but you might actually feel genuinely more passionate when it comes to X, Y, and Z, and might be able to help me even more from that point of view. So I think just not boxing or choosing to box people in or label them regardless of their experience and the things that have happened in their lives, and also just embracing people for who they are, where they are, and giving them the benefit of the doubt, which I choose to do regardless of what the story and the circumstance may be. That's what allows me to create these connections and relationships. Because then I can just look at you and say, you're just like a human being. You're just like me. You traveled a different path, but I'm still willing to acknowledge you and respect you because you are a human being that's trying to figure it out just like I am.
Yeah. I think when you start looking at it, anybody you meet with this human connection, like how can I be a good human being to somebody else, and how can I make their lives better, and not thinking about what's in it for me when you have this mindset. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this. Like, you start trying to serve other people first, and your level of fulfillment, your level of satisfaction, I think, increases because there's something about helping others that just feels good. But also, like, your connections blossom. They're a bit deeper. They go places you didn't expect to see happen. And so I wanted to talk about, so I'm kind of like skipping around a little bit, but there's more to what you're doing than just some cool dude that moved from Russia to Austin, Texas. And but you're actually doing some pretty cool things. You've taken your life experiences and you're helping others, and you're trying to make a big impact in people's lives. So what are you doing, and what's your mission here?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that question to begin with and acknowledging the work that I've done. So about 3 years ago, I chose to take the next step forward with my story. And that is, I first shared it, and my hope is to really just create a space where people can embrace and acknowledge their own individual experiences and also find power within their own individual stories. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why I firmly do believe that, is because the person that I've become today, no money was able to buy. Everything had to do due to the story that I told myself as far as what I thought was possible and the way that I communicated that story to other people surrounding me. I think our story is the most undervalued currency that's available to us. And once I understood that that story is always available to me, and I don't have to go out there and purchase the latest course, the latest iPhone, or whatever it may be to get access to it, that's when I really started to tap into it even more. And for me, what it started off was, as I mentioned earlier, it was just a space where people were able to share their stories. In fact, initially, it was just a space for adoptees and foster youth to be able to share their stories. And I really wanted to create that space where you could hear all sides of the narrative, the good, the bad, everything in between. The reason why is because I wanted people to come to this, and when they listen and read some of these stories, they can develop a much broader perspective of what's possible when it comes to dealing with a child who might be going through depression or anxiety or loss or missing their family or not fitting in because they don't speak that particular language. And then beyond that, what I began to understand was that about 50 or 60 to 100 stories in, I noticed that this message also began to relate to refugees, immigrants, LGBTQ, and many other marginalized groups in today's day and age. And even saying that word makes me think about this way. So the word marginalized, I think to a degree, there are many aspects to that particular word. I mean, I think when we don't talk about a certain thing, when we don't talk about our insecurities, I think that makes us partially marginalized.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way that I believe in normalizing that experience is having a conversation like this, having the conversation about difficult topics when it comes to our finances, our relationships, our well-being, our health, our mental, our spiritual being. And so when I began to notice that, that's when I really started to dive in and dig deep and create that space. And beyond that particular website, it evolved into a podcast. It evolved into us hosting events around the country. But the biggest thing that I think I made as far as a mindset shift prior to starting that business was I chose to approach it from the different lens that I was taught business from the beginning. So at the very beginning, I was taught to build a business based on somebody else's persona, interests, and where they are in life. I chose to go a different route. I chose to commit to myself. And I remember telling myself that I am going to be the client of this particular business.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I did that, and I don't know how I knew it at the time, but I definitely know it now, is because when you build a business, you're going to be faced with many instances where you're going to be forced with the question or forced to answer the question of, do I stay in business or do I put myself out of business?
Right.
And I think the only real way to know the answer to that is to understand, why did you start this to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
And once I was able to start with myself, I've been able to answer that.
I think because you've done that and you say, hey, I'm building a business that's got myself as the client in mind. And you think to yourself, I'm helping people who are marginalized, and maybe they feel a bit, I guess it's not the word I'm thinking, but the word I'm going to use is despair, but they feel like, like they have nowhere to turn, nowhere to overcome something. And people have this every day in various degrees. And not everybody has been like yourself, where they choose to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to, this isn't the way I want it to be. I'm going to take matters into my own hands and make a change. And you said before, like, it doesn't happen overnight either. These things take time to develop, and you have gains and setbacks. You have successes, making that mindset change, and then you fall back. And then when you've done it enough times, long enough time sustainable, you start building some momentum and you're able to make those changes. But if you're in a position that you are in, and you've been in those times, you've been through both, but you remember, hey, I was those times. What was a message I wanted to hear to help me continue on, to move on, and you're given a voice to other people that are in that situation. Maybe think like, hey, I don't have anywhere else to turn. I don't have that inner drive in me that's saying enough is enough. I'm going to make a change. And you're providing your voice, but you're getting other people, 100 and some stories that, they're all different, but they resonate similarly. Enough is enough. I'm going to take what matters into my own hands. I'm going to choose not to feel this way. And discover myself. So I think that's a good approach on how you come across of who that person is that you're targeting your voice to.
Yeah, and you're spot on with everything that you just said. And I think part of that journey also made me realize this: at the end of the day, people want to understand people.
Yes,
people want to be heard. People want to be valued, and people want to feel like they're making a contribution to this world. And even having these conversations like the one that we're having now, it made me realize that there's so many different shapes and sizes to what we mean by each one of those elements. Being valued, being a contribution. Silence can be a contribution to a conversation. But sometimes we forget about that. And so when there's dead air or no one's saying anything, we think that we have to fill in that time and space because something needs to be said. But yet we don't acknowledge that as a point of reflection. So having the different conversations helped me realize all of those things And that's where I think my genuine passion and interest about humanity just elevated even more and helped me realize that you don't have to be a celebrity to add value to this world.
No.
You don't have to be someone who has made $1 million to make yourself feel like you're valuable. I think this whole concept of success, not to diverge from the initial topic, but for me, success, it has never been about that final destination.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey. Every single day, I choose to tell myself that I'm successful, regardless wherever I am in life. And the reason why is because I choose to be grateful for every single one of those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the society wants to tell us otherwise, that success is only when you have X number of dollars in your bank account. Well, I'll tell you this, when my bank account was in a negative balance, I was happy. I still had a smile on my face because I chose to look at that instance and I said, okay, so what? I'm going to do my best. And if I change the situation today, great. If it takes me a week, great.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to let those things define who I am as a being.
And I would agree with that 100% because when I was in that position 10 plus years ago and I was losing my house, I had no income. I wasn't miserable. I was stressed out, but I was happy. I experienced joy. I experienced both things. And in my position now, I have a steady paycheck. I don't have to worry about, that the house is going to be foreclosed on or anything like that. And when I compare, like, are you happier then or happier now? And the answer is, I'm not necessarily any more or less unhappy. Like I experienced joy back then. I experienced joy now. I experienced stresses and I experience the stresses now. Like they're just different things and they're all relative. But I think what you learn is once you realize that is like, the things you achieve in life, I think the relationships that you make, the impact you have on other lives are more important than, like you said, the things you have that you can buy or whatever, and how success is measured. There's ups and downs, but yeah, I think, when you think about it, like, hey, it's hard to pay your bills. Like, yeah, that's stressful, but you're still going to go and have a good time. You're still going to laugh with friends and stuff like that. So,
and if you're doing the best that you can, well, what else can you do? Right.
Exactly.
Do you think happiness is a choice?
I think this is what I think. I think when people say I want to be happy, and you look at it as a destination, okay, you're happy when you have ups and downs. So when you're down, you say I want to be happy, I want to experience joy. You're going to a place. But if you are at the happiest you've ever been in your entire life, and you lived at that level of happiness for a continued amount of time, say for like a year, then that becomes your baseline of what your happiness is. So that becomes normalized. And now to feel happy, to have that feeling of joy, you have to go above it, or you have to dip down below to come back up. So I think when you say I'm just looking for a place to be happy, you're not going to ever get to this 100% contentment. You're going to have moments of joy. You're going to have moments of sorrow. But when you just look at life and say life is to be experienced, the good, the bad, and maybe a little bit of faith that like everything that you've been through to date has defined who you are, and they shape you. And like for me, I have a wife, I have a son, and anytime I go back into my life and say, hey, I wish X didn't happen or Z didn't happen. Well, because I did, or went through that circumstance, it led me to another progression in my journey that ended up being into a place where I met my wife, which allowed me to, have my son. And you say, if I went a different direction, I wouldn't have ended up where I am now and had these things I wanted. So I kind of figured out where your exact question was, but I think you just have to roll the punches and know like, hey, this is life. It's in shape I am. I'm gonna, hopefully come out on the other side of it. Like you said, it's not a dress rehearsal. You got one shot at it. So, ride with it, roll with it, and know, hey, tough times, good times, you're gonna have a bit of both. And when you focus on the bad times, it's gonna feel like you have a lot more of those than if you focus on the good times. And I also agree, like, everybody's got a different station in life, and some people have more things to overcome than others. But I think that general mindset is kind of like, hey, it is what it is. Let's roll with it.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Anyway,
well, no, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. I got a couple last question for you. Is where can people find what you have going on, and where do you see yourself taking this concept of helping people find out who they are in the next few years?
The first question is, where do people find us? The best way is probably through any of these social media platforms, and that's simply by searching Overcoming Odds, or you can do it through our website, and that is overcomingodds.today. The hidden meaning behind the name of the URL to begin with is you get to start that process today. Mm-hmm. I think the concept, I know for the longest time I struggle with that. Whenever I wanted to start a new habit, I used to always tell myself I'll start tomorrow. Or I wanted to go to the gym and improve my health, I used to say I'll start tomorrow. Well, later on I noticed that the tomorrow literally became tomorrow, and then the week after, the month after, the year after, and then tomorrow never came.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the most important part is just start with wherever you are with what you know and do the best that you can. The question about where we're trying to take this, for me, there have been a lot of people that I truly have been inspired by. Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, a lot of leaders that really chose to put themselves forward as far as their own story and having the courage to step beyond even what they thought was possible and do so. I'm not saying I'm any of those individuals. The reason why I chose to reference names like that is primarily because I think of the courage that they chose in stepping up for themselves and other people. So for me, I think the way that I would answer that question is, I don't choose to look at it from the point of view as far as numbers go, because I really have no control over that. I have no control over however many people I end up impacting, or we end up impacting throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But the mindset that I carry on with me, the mindset that one of my friends ended up passing on to me, and that is...
Are you there?
Yeah.
I lost you for a second. Okay, sorry.
The mindset that I was talking about is the one of my friends that passed it on to me, and that is one person at a time, one day at a time. That's the only thing I can focus on. So going into every opportunity in spaces like this, that's the only thing that allows us to, I think, stay curious and learn from each other. And then beyond that, just like you were saying earlier, if you chose to focus on the bad, well, the situation will always look a lot worse than it is. If you choose to focus on the good, then it's going to feel better, or possibly better. So I think this case is not any different, right? As long as we continue to believe in the fact that you and I are growing from this conversation, and we're developing our relationship, and we are becoming more connected as individuals on our own, but then also as friends, that's what matters. And beyond that, people resonate with that, and people hear that, and people are able to see it, and they're able to identify their own steps to what it means to be successful, or to find the courage, or to share the story. Because for me, coming to this space and saying, hey, here are the 5 steps to developing courage, who am I to say that those are the 5 steps?
Yeah.
What if it takes you 10? What if it takes you 1? What if you already have it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's good stuff. Well, I'm really excited to see how you grow, and I think you're doing some amazing things. You're impacting a lot of people's lives. A lot of them you might not even hear the stories that you've done. That's the one thing I think sometimes people forget is a lot of times people are quiet about their recognition, and they don't reach out and say, hey, like you impacted me, but you hear something yourself and you said, this person really made a difference in my life, but you've never shared that with them. So I know that there's probably people out there that feel the same about you.
Yeah.
And I encourage you to keep up this mission, because I think it's very important, and it's doing a lot of good in the world. And I appreciate you coming on the show, and it was really cool to connect with you through Facebook and randomly. I think when you're open to just like putting yourself in situations of like, hey, if I wanted to meet interesting random people, I can't stop home. I just need to go into different spaces, and there was a virtual space. Facebook that anybody can just say, I'm open to getting on a phone call with a complete stranger and just what they're about. It leads to things, and you're meeting some cool people. So I thank you. Can't thank you for coming on the show, but I'll let you get to your Friday night. I'm sure it's a little bit later over in Texas than it is out here. So
no, I appreciate you. I appreciate you for having me on here and for even choosing to start that conversation. You're right. It is it's one of those things that I think when we're younger, we're told not to do, and that is talk to strangers. But then as we get older, it becomes the name of the game. Isn't that funny how the table actually flips? Is that you actually have to talk to strangers if you want to move forward with your dreams and aspirations. But when you're young, it's like, nope, stay away. Don't do that one.
Exactly. Okay. Well, have a great night, and enjoy your weekend here.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Make sure to visit our website, therealnatepeo.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, so you'll never miss an episode of All In. While you're at it, if you found value, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if simply tell 2 friends about the show. Looking to connect? You can find Nate Peo on LinkedIn or Instagram.